Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the chairman for yielding. H.R. 3843 is a modest yet critical first step to modernizing the antitrust laws. It generates revenue, it makes foreign adversarial interest in transactions more apparent, and it allows more streamlined antitrust enforcement by state attorneys general. On the first issue, I think there is general agreement that the fees that are involved in mergers haven't been raised in decades. This simply allows smaller mergers to pay less, larger mergers to pay more, and so there's no question about it, and this issue came up in the Rules Committee. This bill does not fund a single additional dollar to any agency. This is a revenue generator. There's no appropriation. The appropriations process will require that this be treated like any other revenue that the federal government generates, and that the Appropriations Committee in regular order will decide how to spend the money. And people should also not be concerned. Under the Appropriations Act of 2022, the DOJ Antitrust Division's use of appropriated funds is limited to, and I quote, expenses necessary for the enforcement of antitrust and kindred laws, end quote. There's already a limitation, but it doesn't provide any additional funding. It simply generates revenues and shifts burdens to the largest transactions so that the taxpayers don't have to be responsible for their review. In recent decades, the rising tide of economic concentration has given rise to monopolies that exercise outside influence over our democracy and our political institutions. And at the same time, the budgets for our antitrust enforcement agencies have not kept pace with the demands placed on them. As Brian Deese, the director of the National Economic Council, explained, and I quote, "It is unacceptable for these agencies' resources to lag so far behind the growth of the economy they're charged with protecting," and that's why the Biden-Harris administration issued a statement of administrative policy in support of this bill. We can have the fight about whether additional resources are necessary during the appropriations process. This bill simply raises the fees, gives smaller businesses a break, and doesn't appropriate a single dollar. Title III of the bill strengthens antitrust enforcement by preventing state antitrust actions from being dragged into private litigation in another venue. This legislation enjoys wide support among the states. Last year, the National Association of Attorneys General and every single attorney general in the United States, every state attorney general, wrote a letter urging Congress to pass the bill's amendment to the multi-district litigation statute, quote, as soon as possible, so that our citizens benefit from more efficient, effective, and timely adjudication of antitrust actions, end quote. So I, too, urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this legislation and applaud them for their sponsorship. I want to thank Mr. Buck, who's been a tremendous leader on this package of bills. And, you know, there should be no question. Senator Lee, Senator Cotton, Senator Grassley have said that this package represents, and I quote, a strong bipartisan consensus. These bills improve antitrust enforcement without appropriating any more funds. You don't have to believe me. Those are your Republican colleagues who make the same point. In addition to that, this multi-jurisdiction litigation robs state attorneys general who bring a federal antitrust action in federal court from the ability to litigate in that court, which often, by dragging them to another state, is a great benefit to the big corporations, to the monopolists, but it's harmful to their own constituents, their consumers, their business, which is why they support this legislation. And I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, to add a number of items into the record to reflect the broad support enjoyed by H.R. 3843. First, a strong statement of administrative policy which makes clear that this legislation is necessary to support the President's mission to enforce the antitrust laws to combat the excessive concentration of industry, the abuses of market power, and the harmful effects of monopoly and monopsony. Second, a letter of support from the State Antitrust Enforcement Venue Act of 2021, signed by every Attorney General in the United States, including California's Rob Bonta, who makes clear that, quote, states should be on equal footing with federal enforcers in deciding where, when, and how to prosecute cases, end quote, and not subject to a system where their enforcement actions, and I quote, may be subject to transfer to a multi-district litigation at the behest of defendants, where the cases are typically postponed and may be joined with numerous other lawsuits brought by private plaintiffs, end quote. Third, a letter from a broad coalition of 36 labor, consumer, and public interest groups, including Public Citizen, Public Knowledge, the Open Markets Institute, the AFL-CIO, Teamsters, the SEIU, who state that this bipartisan bicameral legislation represents a critical first step for Congress to reverse the course of lax antitrust enforcement that has proved to be destructive to small business, workers, communities, and innovation. And fourth, a statement from Chris Jones with the National Grocers Association, who says that, and I quote, "This bipartisan proposal does not change the antitrust laws. It takes the simple step of helping enforcers have a better shot of deterring abusive marketplace conduct that American consumers cannot afford right now." And then finally, a statement from Diana Moss, president of the American Antitrust Institute, who states that, quote, "Additional resources are needed to enable the U.S. Department of Justice, Antitrust Division, and the Federal Trade Commission to review and investigate billion-dollar deals," end quote. So for all those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this common sense package that will help to enhance competition, give us the ability to improve our economy, and benefit consumers and workers and innovators and small businesses. And with that, I yield back.